Hello and welcome to So Easy Sewing's Granite City Block of the Month, Block 1 class. Before we begin, please take a few moments to read over the first 5 pages of the pattern. This will give you some general instructions, a list of some needed tools, as well as general vocabulary that will be used throughout the pattern. Included in your pattern is a pre-printed fabric guide. This guide will show images of all of the fabrics needed to complete your quilt blocks in numbered order. Before we begin, please ensure that you have the correct cutting instructions in front of you, as the pattern includes 4 sizes. Also, always refer back to the pre-printed fabric guide before cutting each fabric. First, we're going to cut out all of our strips. Out of fabric 1, we're going to cut 1 2.5 inch strip and 3 1.5 inch strips. We always want to start with our largest piece first and then work our way to the smaller pieces. If it makes it easier for you, you can always iron your fabrics before you start cutting your strips. When you get to your last strip, you always want to make sure that it is the correct size. As you can see on this one, I did have a little bit that I had to trim off. Once you've finished cutting out all of your strips, you do want to iron them before you move on to cutting out your individual pieces. Fabric 1 is very light. To ensure you have the right side of the fabric, use a white sheet of paper to see which side of the fabric is brighter. There are 2 ways to cut your half square triangles using the Creative Grids ruler. Option 1 is to cut them the way that I am in the video, single layer, rotating the ruler with each half square triangle. This will make sure that all of your triangles are exactly the same on the right side of the fabric when you're done. Option 2 is to fold the strip in half and start at the selvage edge, working your way inward. If you cut them this way, you end up with 8 facing one direction and 8 the other from the right side of the fabric. This is important to know because you need to know which is the right side when you go to sew them on later. Once you've cut out all of your half square triangles, make sure you set your excess aside for future blocks. Next, we cut our strips. I first start by cutting off the selvage edge so I have a nice straight edge to work with. Then we cut our largest strips first, so we start by cutting the 12.5 inch strips, and then we set the excess aside for future blocks. Unfortunately, my video cut out while recording how to cut out the pieces, so I've had to re-record how to use the quarter square ruler from Creative Grids. I'm using brown fabric just to demonstrate how to use the ruler, so don't worry that you don't have it. To correctly use your quarter square triangle ruler, first you want to line up the flat edge at the top of your triangle with the side of your strip. Next, you want to make sure that the other side of your strip lines up with the size of quarter square triangle you are attempting to make. So In this case, I am making a 2.5 inch quarter square triangle, and you can see that the edge is at the top and the bottom part of my strip is at 2.5 inches. You can rotate either your ruler or your strip to continue cutting out your pieces. Since I am right-handed, I find it much easier to rotate the strip rather than the ruler. The half square triangle ruler works the same way as the quarter square triangle ruler. You line up the flat point of your triangle with one side of your strip and then use the other end to make sure that it is the correct width that you are trying to make. It is important to note that the half square triangle ruler is not half of the quarter square triangle ruler. As you can see, when I lay them on top of each other, the flattened tip at the top of both rulers is the same width. This is to account for the seam allowance of our half square triangles. If you choose not to use the Creative Grids rulers and instead have your own half square and quarter square triangle rulers at home, that you use the same rulers throughout your entire quilt to ensure the same size pieces. First, we will start with our half square triangles. We will take fabrics 1A and 1G cut out of fabric 1 and 11. You'll match up your fabrics right sides together and sew them at a 1/4 inch seam. These squares will be referred to as Unit A. Once you have all 16 squares sewn together, we will move on to pressing. You'll place your squares face down and press your seams towards the 1G side of your square, or fabric 11. Next, we will sew our flying geese using fabrics 1E and 1J. This is called Unit C. First, we line up the flat tips of our triangles right sides together. Sew all the way off the end of the fabric. Then you can either finger press your fabrics down or iron them at the ironing board, but you want to make sure that your seam is pressed out toward fabric 1E or fabric number 4. Next, we will take our second half square triangle and place it right sides together to finish our flying geese. When you line up your second half square triangle, you want to make sure that the edge of your triangle overlaps the center of your flying geese by a 1/4 inch. This will give you a perfect flat top edge every time. Once we have completed all of our flying geese, we will press our seams outwards towards fabric 4. Next, you want to measure all of your Unit A pieces and make sure that they are 2.5 inches square. Then, measure all of your Unit C pieces and ensure that they are 1.5 inch by 2.5 inch. Once you're sure that all of your pieces are the correct size, you can trim off all of the dog ears and move on to the next step. Next, we will be making our Unit B squares. We will use our fabrics 1H, 1F, and our Unit A squares. Grab a 1H square made from fabric 12 and a Unit A square and place them right sides together. You want to sew them with the solid square on the bottom and the pieced square on the top so that you can ensure that the seam will lay flat when sewing. You will follow the same steps for sewing together pieces 1F made from fabric 5 and Unit A. For these pieces, we will be pressing our seams toward the solid fabric. We press our seams toward the solid squares so that when we sew our pieces together, the seams are in different directions and will nestle together to match our points. Once we've lined up our pieces right sides together, you will see that the seams press against each other and will help prevent gaps. I don't often pin my pieces. However, if it makes it easier for you, you can pin them together. Just make sure you start by pinning the seams together and working your way out. When sewing these together, you want to make sure that your seams continue to lay flat and don't fold back over on themselves and get stitched down. Once you're done, double check that all your seams are laying flat. You may have noticed that when we get to this part, the pattern doesn't specify which way to press these seams. I have found that the best way to get the block to lay flat is to press them open. The best way to prevent pressing our previous seams the wrong direction is to press halfway through the block, stop, rotate the block, and then press the other half. Next, we will make our Unit D pieces using our Unit C flying geese and our 1D rectangles. When sewing these, we will place our pieces right sides together and place them under the foot with our seams faced up. This is so that we can make sure that our seams lay flat and don't fold back over. For these pieces, we want to press our seams towards our large rectangle. Now we will start sewing our rows using our Unit D and 1I pieces. We will sew these on just like we did to our large rectangles with the seams facing up. Also, depending on how difficult you find pressing multiple seams at a time, you can press before adding your next Unit D piece. To make our other rows, we will be using our Unit B and Unit D pieces. We can see our block coming together. Now, double check that your seams are lying flat when adding each new unit. Just like with our other row, you can press before adding your other unit. I found that the best way to avoid these folds in our seams is to sew with the seams for Unit D face up. We're going to press our seams just like we did with Unit B in opposing directions to help nestle the fabric together and align our blocks. For our outside rows, we will be pressing our center seams inward. And of course, since these seams go in, our center row seams will press out. And just like with Unit B, we want to make sure that our seams are lined up and pressing against each other. When sewing your rows together, it definitely makes it easier if you pin them. Remember to always make sure that you remove your pins before they go under your foot, and double check that all of your seams are laying flat. To make sure that our block lays flat, we're going to press our seams inward. Now we have to add our borders from fabrics 1C and 1B. First, you will sew pieces 1C to opposite sides of your block. When sewing your borders, ensure that your seams are face up so that you can be sure that they sew down flat. To help reduce the bulk in our seams, we're going to press them toward the outer edge. Next, you will sew on your last two borders, fabric 1B. And again, we will press our seams out. Congratulations, you finished your first block.